Today's event features Meredith O'Brien for her book, Uncomfortably Numb, a memoir about the life-altering diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, and Leslie Gray Streeter for her new book, Black Widow, a sad, funny journey through grief for people who normally avoid books with words like journey in the title. If you have questions for today's authors, I encourage you to ask them in the comments. We'll pass them along. I'm now going to turn things over to Ziziva's managing editor, Oscar Villalone. Oscar will serve as today's MC. Thank you all so much for joining us. Enjoy, and thank you, Oscar.
Hey, thank you, Evan. Now allow me to please introduce our two authors. Meredith O'Brien, as Evan said, is the author of Uncomfortably Numb, a memoir about the life-altering diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. Library Journal said of Uncomfortably Numb that it will resonate with those living with the unpredictability of chronic conditions. And Dietland author Sarai Walker said of the book, detailing her treatment, her struggles to be taken seriously by doctors, and the effects of it all on her family, career, and sense of self, O'Brien writes in a clear-eyed and courageous voice, bringing the reader along with her as she navigates the profound, life-altering experience. A former newspaper reporter, investigative journalist, Meredith O'Brien teaches journalism and writing at Northeastern University in Boston, where she also serves as a writing coach. She's also the author of 3 other books, including Mr. Clark's Big Band, A Year of Laughter, Tears, and Jazz in a Middle School Band Room, which won an Independent Publishers Book Award and was a finalist for a Foreword INDIES Award. Welcome, Meredith.
Thank you for having me here.
Oh, thank you for being here. And Leslie Gray Streeter, she is the author of Black Widow, a sad, funny journey through grief for people who normally avoid books with words like journey in the title. Booklist says of Black Widow, so often readers feel it's not okay to laugh in times of grief, but Streeter not only reminds us it's okay, she encourages it. Black Widow has earned a place on the shelf next to Joan Didion and Cheryl Strayed in the realm of the grief memoir. And Laura Lipman says of the book, I can only marvel at Leslie Streeter's resilience, humor, and candor. Black Widow is a funny, heartwarming read about one of the worst things that can happen to a person. We should all be this grounded in our day-to-day lives. Leslie Gray Streeter is a columnist for the Palm Beach Post, as well as a playwright and contributing editor for Modern Loss. She lives in West Palm Beach. Welcome, Leslie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'll be popping back in later to moderate the audience Q&A, so please do send us your questions for the authors via Facebook Live. And remember, you can order copies of these books along with the books of all the other authors participating in Lockdown Lit at Lunch on the Booksmith website. So without further ado, I turn it over to Leslie and Meredith.
Gosh, thank you so much. It's so funny hearing people talk about your work, and Meredith and I have discussed how, you know, it's so personal to write a memoir and to write about your lives. So it's some sort of like weird disembodied experience to hear, even though I've read those quotes before, to hear someone else say them, like, I feel like Sally Field, they like me. This was not garbage. This really works. So, you know, because I think also part of being a journalist is that you are constantly doubting yourself, trying to figure out the next truth. So when you hear that, you're like, why? Why did you say that? But anyway, my book is Black Widow, is about the first year of my widowhood when my husband died. It'll be 5 years this month. Unexpectedly at the age of 44 of a heart attack. And it is sad, it is funny, sometimes it's both in the same sentence or so, but I was gonna read a passage. Sometimes I try to err on the side of not super tragic when I read these things. People don't go, oh, this sucks, and they stop reading. So I'm reading a chapter called Ready to Take a Chance Again, maybe, probably, and this is about closer to the year mark about, will anyone ever love me again, and am I doomed to be a widow and wear black for the rest of my life. So you'll also notice if you read the book that most of the chapter titles are pop culture references, because that's what I do as a reporter, and also because I thought it was funny. So, okay. I have a running list of the art that Scott has ruined for me by dying. Movies I can't watch anymore, songs I rush to turn off during the opening chords, books on our bookshelf my eyes quickly skip over. The list includes previous favorite Sleepless in Seattle. Tom Hanks is widowed with a kid who is afraid of forgetting his mom. Most Gloria Estefan ballads about not being able to live without someone's beloved. The Andy Griffith Show. Did Opie ever get therapy? And our wedding song, Stephen Bishop's It Might Be You, from the movie Tootsie. We chose that because I'd found the answer. There was no question. It was him. It was Scott. And now it's not. Stupid song. Scott's death did give me new appreciation for a movie or two I've been meh about before. One was Practical Magic, where reluctant witch Sandra Bullock conjures up a man to beat the family curse that prohibits her from love, and then collapses into guilty grief when he dies. She blames herself because she believes, even though they loved each other very deeply and have two dear daughters, that maybe he died because she dragged him into a situation she created by trying to thwart her undeniable fate to be alone forever. But all is not lost. She eventually finds love with hot Aidan Quinn, who knows about her weirdness and her damage and also her magic, and he loves her for all of it. Her first husband and his loss will always be a part of her life, but this becomes a part of the foundation for a second chance. That didn't mean anything to 28-year-old single me, but it means a whole lot now. The other one is Must Love Dogs, with John Cusack and Diane Lane as meet cute 40-somethings whose conflicts and bumbles are just annoying stumbling blocks on the way to the inevitable reunion and happy ever after. Nobody comes to these sorts of movies for the pretty people not to end up together. It's a silly movie, but there's an interesting subplot involving Diane Lane's widowed father, played by Christopher Plummer, who's still super smooth, and a quirky, many times divorced lady named Dolly, played by Stockard Channing. Dolly falls helplessly in love with Christopher Plummer, because who wouldn't? Since he's dapper and quotes Irish poets at family gatherings. She thinks he might finally be that everlasting love that's always eluded her, but then has her heart broken when Christopher Plummer invites two other women to Thanksgiving dinner. That's shady. Use your words, Christopher Plummer, not multiple ambush dates. The first time I saw it at 34, I identified with Dolly, the lonely lady who thought she'd finally found the one, and I considered Christopher Plummer to be the villain. But now in my widowhood, I get him. He appreciates the life he still has, and he doesn't want to be lonely, but he's not lying to anybody either. I had the love of my life, he tells Diane Lane, and he means it. At 34, I saw that as some sort of selfish, stubborn fear of opening himself up that would allow him to play the geriatric field and deny happiness to poor Stockard Channing. But now, without my love, I get it. Movie Christopher Plummer had the most amazing life with his chosen partner, and it ended before he wanted it to. He's not looking for a replacement because, as far as he's concerned, there's no replacement for that. He's good. And he's confident enough to say that he's got what he needs. That sort of certainty isn't selfishness, it's power. God, I want that. I can't say if I'm more of a Sandra Bullock or a Christopher Plummer because it's all too soon and there aren't any hot, handsome men offering me that choice just yet. Right now, it's just me and my empty bed and my broken heart. Although there are parts of me, the lady parts, that occasionally remember they like being used. The rest of me can't imagine ever opening myself up to that kind of hurt. I hope I prove to be a combination of both of them, that I can square my loss and the end of love, the love I thought was forever. Even in the sad, damaged state, I see how it would be nice to have love, or at least sex again, because in the 5 years I was with Scott, I became quite fond of it. And I would really hate to think I only had a 5-year sex window. But I also have enough faith in the love I had to reconcile myself to the messy perfection of that, to know that even if I never find someone else, I got more happiness than most people do. But God, if you're reading this, know that I really, really hope that's not the case. The thing about being a widow in the 21st century, as opposed to 100 years ago, is that there's no socially accepted mourning period that governs when you can leave the house, how much unflattering black drapey shit you have to wear and for how long, and when you get to date, or whatever you want to call it. Back in the day, they'd shame a widow for trying to get out there or marry too soon, unless the woman was culturally expected to marry her late husband's next eldest unmarried brother. It's different now, but there are still rules. I've heard couples who got together years after their respective spouses died, but were still shunned by their circle. People who honestly need to just thank Jesus for their still breathing partner and mind their damn business. And look at the tabloids and Twitter weigh in on celebrities who dare walk down the street with a person of the opposite sex. Is she ready yet? Is it too soon? Have a seat, Twitter. You don't get to decide this. The widows do. I do. I have no effing idea when I'm going to be ready. Maybe the answer will just fall on me from the sky. The universe loves dropping unexpected shit on me. maybe I'll get hit with something nice this time. There you go.
That was great, Leslie.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that excerpt, I think, captures what I love most about this book, is that you do take these really intense moments of your life and you make them three-dimensional. You make them, it's not just the sadness you feel, it's the sadness, the irony, the insanity of
Yes.
I am in this situation. And so I really love that. That really captured it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So my book, Uncomfortably Numb, is a memoir about my, specific period of time from 2012 through 2017. In 2012, I first started experiencing what I later learned were symptoms of multiple sclerosis, and it took 2 years for that to get diagnosed. The year that I was officially diagnosed was a pretty rocky year. My mom passed away. She was 65. She had a fast-moving cancer. And so our family had to deal with that. My father had health issues, and then I had health issues, and I also had an unexpected job change. So 2014 was horrible, but the book is about what do you do when that horrible happens, and then how do you deal with it? How do you move forward? And Leslie and I were talking beforehand, we can talk a little bit more about this later, about how we're dealing with these unexpected, involuntary changes in our lives right now with COVID and lockdown, and nobody likes wearing masks. Nobody likes having to be away from their family. And a lot of people are trying to figure out, how can I own this moment? Like, how can I assert some control? And what I've been reading during the lockdown is that a lot of people are adopting pets. And I have a friend whose husband, who is a bank examiner, started making kombucha, like on sourdough starter, and then they adopted a dog. It was totally not expected. But so this lockdown has gotten a lot of people to do things they wouldn't normally do. Well, that kind of ties into the section I'm going to read, which is a little more than 6 months after I'd been diagnosed with MS. And I was really sad, and I was still mourning my mom, worried about my dad, worried about my health. So I decided, let's adopt a puppy. And it wasn't necessarily the best, well thought out decision, but that's what everybody's kind of struggling with right now. Okay. I find myself thirsty for a gleaming distraction from the gloom that adheres to the folds of my brain like barnacles. I seek out a solution in the squirming, yelping form of a puppy. However, my notion of adopting a physical embodiment of hope in life is not uniformly embraced by the people with whom I live. Now, at this time, I had twins who were in high school and a younger son who is in 8th grade. Scott is also my husband's name. Scott thinks Max, our 5-year-old Havanese Wheaten Terrier mix, is plenty canine for us all. 2 of the kids think Max will feel slighted and displaced by another dog. Skeptical, and yeah, there's the dog I actually adopted barking in the other room. Skeptical, I silently wonder if their apprehension is more a reflection of their worries that MS and my writing offer plenty competition for my limited time and attention. Only one kid agrees to it that adopting a puppy would allow us to focus on something other than death and illness. So I persist, I press, I lobby, and I forward to my family members images of puppies from animal rescue websites that are so sweet that, the kind you see shared on memes all the time, that your teeth ache by looking at them. I scan websites in search of a dog age 1 or younger, onto whose small shoulders I will place the burden of trying to erase the pall that has become my unwelcome shadow. I become fixated. Kind of obsessed, actually. I check the websites multiple times a day for available dogs ready to pounce on a new listing. I eventually win the battle within the household as everyone reluctantly concedes to move forward. Then I see Fraser, a slight, bony, brown, tan, black and white 2-month-old. He's described on the animal shelter website as a mini schnauzer mix, and mix is the key word here. Now, the American Kennel Club website tells me that mini schnauzers are, quote, friendly, obedient, and smart. They're the 16th most popular dog breed in the United States, one which has medium energy, and a small size. I gaze at the charming photos of mini Schnauzer puppies, which spark all kinds of gooey maternal feelings, and not a scintilla of negativity, I think, can flourish when you're looking at those puppies. I filed the adoption application and then emailed the link to my husband in that order. When I speak with Scott later, I hear the hesitation in his voice. He's so obviously not on board with this, but he's going along with it for my sake. And I ignore his hesitation because I have my puppy goggles on. On the last Saturday of January 2015, the whole family, including Max, climbs into the car, drives a half hour to a small shelter in middle of Massachusetts to meet Fraser. He's a floppy-eared little armful with oversized eyes, cow-like pink and tan patches across his soft belly, tender pink paw pads, and a curious jauntiness in his step that lists a little bit to the right. Max is unaware that by the virtue of the fact that neither dog is snarling, that this little dude is coming home with us.
Oh, no.
Without second guessing, I take Max's neutrality as an endorsement. An hour plus later, we're in the warmth of our kitchen, and Max looks enormous standing next to the newly renamed Teddy. Teddy, we coo at him, attempting to orient him to his new name. It is only after nightfall, which arrives shockingly early in the dead of winter, when I remember with bracing clarity, potty training. I conveniently blotted out of my mind all the work that's required to train a puppy with a teeny bladder to relieve himself outside. I gave no consideration, nada, to sleep or crate training. In my quest to find a puppy heart to heal my own, I blinded myself to reality. It is a shock to the system when Teddy starts whining in his crate, the one into which Scott and I had put a cushy dog bed and situated on the floor next to ours. The reality of puppyhood calls with a vengeance at 2 a.m. when I must carry Teddy outside over the snow to which his paws seem rather sensitive. I'm gonna have to do this for weeks, I think. The cold air bites at my nose and the exposed parts of my neck, which is quickly losing its fresh from the blanket's warmth. We adopted Max 5 years ago in the late summer. We didn't have to do any of this carrying over the snow or bundling up and taking him outside business. As I wait for the petite creature to empty his bladder, I finally grasp what I have done. I'm 5 years older than when we adopted Max. Now I require more sleep and become fatigued much more quickly, which is because of the MS. Dragging myself out of bed is much harder now than it was then. A few days of getting up in the middle of the night with Teddy is going to render me sleep deprived, non-functional, and super cranky. The burden of bringing Teddy outside in the middle of the night will have to fall to Scott. When I put all this together, I finally understand this is one of the reasons he was so against this new dog in the first place. So Teddy, we call him, is my MS dead mother dog because I was in a bad place when we got him. And he was not, it should be noted, a mini Schnauzer. When I brought him to the vet said, he's a Jack Russell. No. And a Jack Russell Terrier is like caffeine on legs. Yes, like it is. So I didn't tell my husband that he was a Jack Russell for a couple weeks. so he wouldn't say, we're taking him back. But yeah, so it wasn't, we love him, he's sweet, but he's crazy, so.
Did he and Max ever find a moment to chill or no?
Well, Max is really, he's like, hey, whatever, man, he's chill. And Teddy's like, ah. So Teddy's constantly launching himself at Max, and Max will occasionally just push him over and push him away. And they do have a kind of a brotherly love-hate relationship together. But I was right in that having the puppy did make me think less about all of the other sadness and more about just taking care of him. But it was a lot to take care of in that moment.
One of the things that struck me about that is there's a thing I think that people who've had trauma do where we go, okay, we're going to get through this, however, and we tell ourselves things like, I'm going to eat this and it's going to be okay. Or I'm going to get this dog and it's going to be okay. And the fact that you didn't remember like the puppies need stuff and like they poop made such sense to me. because there were moments where I would go, well, this is what we're doing. And then it would be like, but what about all the stuff that comes with it? I'm like, well, I didn't think of that. Why do I have to? Because I'm just muddling through. So yeah, that it's so funny because I think that people ask me all the time, I'm sure they ask you too, like, how did you do it? How did you get through? And obviously everyone's answer is different, but mine was just like, you decided that you had no choice but to, and you kind of barrel through. And I'm not going to say it wasn't like super freaking messy. Because of course it is. And I think if people are being honest, even if, you know, we're used to like watching like movies where, you know, people have illness and they suffer very stoically and they're whatever.
And they look
get
perfect and beautiful while they're doing
they
it.
look perfect and beautiful. There's this horrible movie, and I love both these people, this horrible movie with Winona Ryder and Richard Gere, where it's called Sweet November, where she plays this incredibly young woman who falls in love with Richard Gere, and then she dies. You know, was that them or Charlize Theron? There's one that was them together, one that was Keanu Reeves and Charlize Theron. It's basically the same movie.
Doesn't the woman have cancer and dies from cancer? It's a tragic death, yeah.
Tragic and it's sad, but everyone is, and he learns from his pain because she has to die for him to learn a thing. Doesn't that piss you off?
Yes, I always say all of this, none of this travels in a straight line. Like grieving someone who you lost, like even to make this more of a writ large conversation, like the students who are grieving their high school graduations, and the students who are grieving, or people are grieving having their weddings, or being able to actually have funerals for loved ones in the midst of this. It's like none of our grief or all of these feelings we have when unexpected things take our lives and turn them upside down, we don't necessarily behave rationally. We don't necessarily behave in I am on my healing track now, and I'm going to be better if I just follow this, because it doesn't go straight.
It runs off the rails, it gets stuck, it runs into something else, it kind of blows up in the back and someone has to come along and fix it. Oh yeah, and you kind of like limp to the end there, and there is no end, and it keeps going. Like, I thought this train had a destination. No, it doesn't. It just keeps going. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was what made you decide to take this incredibly topsy-turvy and painful moment in your life and write a book about it?
Well, it's actually a pretty pragmatic and very non-inspiring answer. While I was, during that summer in the aftermath of all of this, I was diagnosed in July of 2014. And then I wasn't going to be teaching in the fall. And I felt, I didn't know what my treatments were going to be like, if it was going to render me really sick. I didn't know if my condition was going to worsen at that point, but I felt like I had to do something. And so luckily I had this serendipitous connection with a former newspaper colleague of mine who was helping to start an MFA program that was largely online. And it was an MFA in creative nonfiction. And I said, oh my God, can I please join that? Can I write with it? I needed something to focus. And originally I was going to be, I was working on that book about the jazz band that I had been working on when I got diagnosed. And that was going to be my thesis, but then I found a publisher for it, but I hadn't finished my program yet. So I needed a thesis. And I said, well, I'm in the middle of all this. I'll just write about it. And so I just kind of picked it and I wrote the thesis in 9 months and to get it done. It wasn't even close to publishable at that point, but I wrote the very first draft in 9 months. So it was my MFA thesis. And then I had to polish it. And I figured after I read it, I said, maybe this will be helpful to anyone who either has chronic illness or loves someone with a chronic illness, or just someone whose life gets kind of upended by anything like this. What about for you? Was yours a deliberate choice I'm going to write about this?
It kind of was. I have a friend, Scott Iman, who's a Hollywood historian who used to be the books editor at Palm Beach Post, and he's done things with Turner Classic Movies. He's written books on John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart. He's just a very, plugged in guy. And for years I've been saying, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to write fiction. And I would get like 3 chapters in and get bored and go, eh. And he said to me, you will finish the book that you have to finish, the book that comes into your brain that is, there's an imperative, almost physical need to finish. So the day that my Scott died, so many Scotts, the day that my Scott died, Scott Iman and his wife Lynn were in my kitchen, and I don't know what came over me, but I went, I think this is my book. And he said, I think unfortunately it is too, kiddo. And I felt like that moment, I had barely been a widow for like 8 hours, 10 hours tops. And something in my brain thought, you know, because you're a journalist, I got to do this. I got to make some sense of this. I have to process this. And I process things through writing and through jazz hands. And I was doing this a lot. And my writing is basically jazz hands, but literary. And I was like, okay, so it was just a thought. It was in my brain. And thinking of that gave me, even if it had never gotten done, my brain was sort of like trying to paper over all the bad parts and make some sense of what was happening. So I think it told me, well, just focus on, maybe you're turning this into a book or something. And it started as like notes on my, it wasn't this phone, but a phone, the notes mode. Like I would be in the grocery store when people finally let me out of the house and just write something down. And the first chapter is about the day after Scott died, being in a graveyard and talking to a very slightly pushy but nice salesperson and trying to figure out where he's going to be buried and then me buried, because I will be next to him, and how stupid and absurd that is. And I remember when that happened, I mean, I didn't write things down that day, but I remember the next day I just wrote like words, just like, it wasn't full sentences. It's just like, I wrote the word packages, which figures into the thing. And I wrote things like surreal. And, you know, I was supposed to have been finishing a story about going drinking the day before. And there were all these supposed to happen things. This is what I wanted to ask you about. Part of what we both write about is what happens when your life blows up in an unexpected way. And I mean, I read the part about you know, talking to the doctor and they're running over different things that could be wrong. And you're thinking, but I got to do this and I got to do that. And it's like, it's not, reality isn't lining up to your plans. And unfortunately, that's pretty accurate with what everyone's going through right now. Talk to me a little bit about how that's relatable.
Well, I would guess that every family or every group of friends, there's somebody who has had a health issue in some way. I mean, I have friends who you don't expect get cancer diagnoses or have other things. So everybody at some point, whether it's them or their peers or their family, deals with health issues. And it seems like in a lot of cases, it just comes out of nowhere, like a cancer diagnosis out of nowhere or an MS diagnosis out of nowhere. And people are funny about illness in that they don't know how to handle it. They don't know what to say to one another. They don't know if they should just say, you're going to be fine. You're going to be okay. This is going to be great. And I'm like, you don't really know that. Or people who are tell me every little detail. I want to know everything that they said, or questioning every choice that you made, or did you go to the right doctor? Or are you at the right place? And I think in our country, we don't talk often. We still, a lot of people still think of illness as private and shameful, and we don't talk about it, and they worry about it. And when I was deciding to write about this, I was also writing about my mother's illness and death. And ironically, my mom was a very private person, and here I am writing about her. But she didn't want to tell people about her illness. Like she was reluctant, and she didn't want to talk about it. I'm like, Mom, this could be helpful. You could learn things. But she was much more private. I process in a very much like you were saying, in a repertorial way. Like I research things and I write things down. And I found as I was going through this process, like when I finally decided I'm going to write a book on it, I had already gone through about a year of having MS. So I wound up pulling out all my text messages to my friends and family during that time, music, looking at my mom's date book, looking at my date book, looking at pictures on my phone, and trying to recreate as much as I could of what I remembered happening. And then I also requested all my medical records from the various doctors. So that way I could say, I had the exact dates, I knew who the doctors were, but in the book it doesn't, I use anonymous names for the doctors, but it was helpful because at one point in the process, there had been, they had found a lesion at the base of my brain where it connects to the spinal cord. And I went to see a neurologist, and he did a physical exam. And during the intake interview, I happened to mention, yeah, I have some issues with anxiety, but I'm dealing with it. It's fine. I'm not concerned about it. He basically decided, and he wrote in my my medical notes, that he believed that this was psychosomatic in nature, that what I was experiencing was psychosomatic. I'm like, well, that thing in my head is not, I didn't create that from being nervous. Like, he basically encouraged me to do yoga and calm down. And so I was just like, okay, like whatever. But then getting that documentation was important. Did you feel that you approached your book like a reporter as you were going through it?
I didn't. I've been, I guess, lucky from my perspective to have been given a long career and earned a long career as a columnist. So I've written about myself. I had an editor who once, he thought insultingly, said, Leslie, you have a great talent for being the center of attention. And I said, yes, what of it? Isn't it great? Because, you know, people do that to women, because how dare we think about ourselves? The guys are the sports reporters and sit around in the newsroom and talk about themselves all the time. No one tells them they're self-absorbed, even if they think of it. And I wrote movie reviews, and I wrote, you know, music reviews. And then when I moved here, I did those things. I also wrote a column that was called That Girl, which was, you know, basically about me. It was about places and things I found to do around town. And I was single, like Black Carrie Bradshaw. And I wrote about, and I would ask my friends, can I use your name? Can I say me and Lauren and Stephanie and Nirvi went to blah, blah, blah. And they go, sure. So people would, I'd be with them and someone would go, are you Stephanie? Are you whatever? So it was like, my friends were like, what's happening? But all that's to say, that was a lot of what I did. So writing about myself was not like foreign to me, but writing this long, because I'd never written a book before, and writing specifically about myself, like when I wrote That Girl thing, it was myself and also about the sushi restaurant, myself and also about the club. So this was about me. And like you said, the repertorial parts were writing things down and sending those chapters to friends who were in it and saying, did this happen this way? Did this, I mean, no one's, for this kind of thing, I wrote down things like the part about the adoption process. I ran it by social workers, my social workers, because I wanted to make sure that even if I didn't mention names and I didn't get anything wrong about the process, and I didn't misrepresent it, because it wasn't just what happened to me. I think adoption is very interesting to people, and foster care adoption, which does not get written about as much, and familial kinship adoption does not get written about as much. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't write it in a way that wasn't accurate, even though it was mostly accurate to my experience. I wanted to make sure I didn't like conflate parts of the steps or, you know, that kind of thing. So, and I cared much more about this, I think, than some people did, but the people that I wrote about who said, you got it exactly right, that was my reward for having been so nitpicky about it.
That's interesting, because I wanted to make sure things were right in my book too. And I did something that I know we both as journalists have been told, you never let people read the story before you go to publication. Never. But this to me was different, because this was a very personal piece of work that would also reveal other people's lives. So I let my brother read through it and say, okay, I flashed back to some memories of childhood. I said, tell me if this reads to you as it's my perspective, but it doesn't read true to you. Do you find anything that's worrisome in here? I did the same with my husband and my kids. Well, except my daughter was the only one who read the draft. The boys were like, eh. And I said, well, then don't complain to me if you don't like it. I said, but my daughter read it, my husband read it. And I ran those things by them, because I wanted to make sure that they felt the family dynamic was captured aptly. Now, you wrote a lot about family. Did anyone in your circle or friends not like push back or say, hey, you can't include that?
Everybody was really cool. The funny part was I have an editor, and I can mention his name now. My editor, Larry, I mentioned parts of him and I mentioned his name, but there was a part where I come back from a bereavement leave, and that day he tells me he's canceling one of my columns. And I showed it to him and he said, oh my God, everyone's going to read this and go, oh, how dare you do this to her? And I'm going to be the bad guy. So I took his name off of that part. So when the draft came out, I sent it to him. He goes, where's my name? And I said, dude, you told me. And he goes, well, they would have figured out anyway. I was like, and it's fine. So it was Larry. Anyone who's wondering who knows Larry, it was Larry. But it wasn't his fault anyway. It was, he was, you know, it's unfortunately the way of newspapers and stuff. The stuff gets whittled, and unfortunately that was the moment. I just hadn't been around. The decision had been made while I was gone. I just hadn't been around to tell. And there was no good time, like say in the book, to tell me that story. It just sucked. And I, of course, had this, you know, melodramatic thing. People often talk about, as people, we consider ourselves like the star, like of a movie. My movie is like either an 80s like movie of the week. There's always like a montage of some sort, and it slows down, or it's some sort of like, you know, 80s or 90s movie. It's like that movie with all the hot black people from the 90s and The Best Man, where it's like, and then there's them in college, and then there's what, it's like St. Elmo's Fire. It's nuts. Anyone under 40 is like, St. Elmo's what? That's okay. So I think about things that way, but I also, like I said, the danger is saying, did I remember only my part of this? And when I'm talking about the other people in the story, am I attributing perspectives or feelings to them that aren't true? Like when I write about my friend Melanie giving me the fireball shots in the backyard, and she's, you know, pretty prominent where she lives, and I didn't want to, like, everyone's gonna figure out it was her because I used her name. And she was like, fine, go ahead and do it. I was like, did it happen? This is how I remember it. Did it happen this way? And she said, yeah, that's how it happened. And I was like, if she agrees with it, that's fine with me. How did you decide what was too much to tell?
Well, I was looking at the and this is a weird thing about writing a memoir, when you are the main character and you're trying to step back and think of what is the main character saying, and it's you, but you're like, okay, and looking at the arc of the story when it's your life. So you're trying to say, what services the story here? What helps readers understand? And there were things that happened within my general family that I could have included, but I felt like, because they put stress on me during an already stressful period of time, but I felt that what I already had laid out sent that message already, that it was pretty clear. I was experiencing a lot of pressure and a lot of things that I didn't need to kind of compound it by putting in more family issues. There were things happening that weren't my stories to tell. And I didn't feel I could put some information about what someone might be experiencing in the book, because it would be too revealing for them.
Yeah.
And so I withheld that. I don't think it hurt the story or the authenticity of the story that I was telling, which was about a woman in her mid 40s with teenagers, and her mother dies, her father gets sick, she loses her job, she gets this illness. I don't think that not telling those little details took away from that.
Yeah.
So if I felt that was too much, then I didn't include it. And like, I write about my mom, with whom I had a rocky relationship. Like I detail one event where I had a novel published, and she came late to the book event, and I jokingly said she kind of heckled me at my own book event. She asked, like, and she was joking, but kind of not. And so I decided, I'll include this because my mom was a tough cookie. And so putting that in there, I think, showed people what our dynamic was like. But so I didn't feel badly about that. But some other things I chose not to put in because I felt it might hurt other people and it really wouldn't serve the story. What about you? Did you make those similar choices?
I did. Like, I wrote about, and once again, I didn't want to, there's nothing worse to me that when you write a story and you read a story and you know that the person's holding back something, and you go, why did you write this if it was going to be redacted and drawn lines through and whatever? So what's the point of it? Because I'm not famous, so why would anyone care unless I was being authentic? But there were things I decided, like, for instance, that I was not going to tell any of the background of my son's life previous to him coming into my purview. because it's not my business and it's his business. And, you know, from years of covering celebrities and reading celebrity memoirs and stuff, and knowing that, you know, you write all these things about your kid and you give him some interesting name and you get him be photographed naked and, you know, upside down with a tiger, whatever, you know, and they write a book about you later and sue you and talk about you on Oprah. And I didn't want any of that to happen. So I decided that I would keep that part very private, but then so much of the writing around the process once he came to us, and particularly the scene where I write about the legal process of having the parents' parental rights terminated, was very painful because I love everyone involved. I love, but also making sure that I wrote it in a way that the readers who, once again, don't know me, didn't read it and go, why would you bring that up and not talk about this? And I have not had one complaint other than, the only comments I've really had are people, particularly people who are from the adoption perspective, say to me, you know what? I really appreciate that. I appreciated you speaking out about that, or not speaking out, or being respectful of this little human as a person who will one day read about himself and go, you did what? So yeah.
That's cool. I don't think there's a right choice in these. It's just, obviously if I was writing a story that was, say, about substance abuse but didn't talk about the substance abuse, but it was clear that's what it was, then that would be problematic. But when you're writing, I chose to willingly expose my health issues. I exposed my relationship with my family as long as they were cool with it, and just tried to explain how things went for me. And I once heard, I went to a book event where this writer named Helen Pepe was reading. She wrote a book, I think it's called Pigs Can't Swim. And she was talking about how she had written about all of her siblings and she gave them all pseudonyms. And she was trying to, like, the sister who twirled her hair, the sister who was this. And she tried to protect their identities. And then she said in the Amazon reviews, the sister who was identified as the sister who twirled her hair outed herself in the comment section, saying, I'm the sister who does this, and I didn't like, and she was just like, I was trying to protect her, but what are you gonna do?
It's really difficult. What do you think, like I said before, you know, during this time of coronavirus, that grief and weirdness and unexpected crappy stuff, and that's a technical term, unexpected crappy stuff, that's something that's universal. How do you think what you write about in your life perhaps relates to this moment we're having right now?
Well, I was particularly concerned about my health in the coronavirus because I wasn't sure if my medicine made me particularly susceptible to the coronavirus, which my MS doctor, my neurologist, has told me, no, it doesn't, which is odd. But I'm like, okay, good. But now, like the idea that people are upset about being locked down, for example, like I was locked down in Massachusetts for quite some time. It's funny because as someone with a chronic illness, every summer when it gets hot and humid, I am locked down by virtue. I can't go outside in the heat and the humidity because I have damage from my disease in my brain where it regulates heat. And so if I go outside on a hot and humid day, my vision will blur. I'll get stars in the corners of my eyes. My knees will get weak, and then I'll be sick to my stomach and lightheaded. So I have to go back inside where it's cooler, and then I can orient myself. So in the summer, I have to go from air-conditioned place to air-conditioned place, or only go to the beach if it's a cool, breezy day after 4, or like, so I'm very familiar with this idea of not being able to go out because of health. And I think that everybody is now becoming intimately familiar with worrying about it all the time. And that worry that you walk around with is always there if you have a chronic illness, but right now it's all around us, and it's all around every decision we're making. Like, do you go back to do your children go back to school? Do you let them go back to school? Do you go back to work? Like, is it okay for you to take your elderly parent out to the grocery store? Like we're all thinking about health and all thinking about our mortality. And this came along, nobody wanted it, but we have to live with it. And I look at it like MS came along, I didn't want it. I don't want to live with it, but what choice do I have? I get puppies instead.
There you go. And I agree with that, because it's like those of us in the widow space and the grief community, but particularly in the widow group, because that's what my thing is, talk about how no one wants to be in this club. Nobody would pick this. It's not something that you would choose. It's not like a Hallmark movie where, like, you know, the woman moves to Apple Valley, Wisconsin or whatever, and she meets a hot young widower who has a damaged soul. He's like a carpenter or some shit. And, you know, and you have this moment where it's like widowhood is a character, a piece of your character, like, and it made you stoic and strong and you learned, and that's stupid and nobody wants that. So yeah, I think that in this moment, I've had so many questions, not just about, you know, people's own grief or their reaction to other people's grief with loss, but how do you deal with this? Is it easier? And I was joking with friends of mine who are part of Soaring Spirits International, which is a group for widowed people. And we were saying that honestly, when COVID first happened, before we knew how really long lasting this thing was going to be, we were like, we've had crappy things happen to us before. And even though it's much worse and much more deadly and much more awful than we imagined, there still was a sense of, we have figured out how to get through bad things. And this is a universal bad thing. So in a weird way, it does not that it feels better, but everyone else is going through this at the same time. And we all have our different experiences that sort of buffer or support, you know, how it is that we cope with these things, or like the tools that we learned from our previous traumas. And I think it's been very helpful to me, because that what you said in the very beginning, the understanding that the first time that you learn that plans are futile sometimes, and that nothing is necessarily, like when you're writing about, I'm supposed to be writing this book about this band leader and there was something wrong with my leg and I can't focus on that because this is what I'm doing. And this in your leg didn't care what your plans were. I think it was certainly relatable to me when you're like, I'm not supposed to be here yet you are. I think is super relatable.
Right. All of us finding ourselves in these strange positions. I still resonate. Near the beginning of your book, where you're talking to the funeral home person, and you call him the nice enough salesman, and then you keep calling him that, and then you're talking about how he's saying all these insane things that don't make sense, and you're just like, this isn't real life. And I still feel like as a society, we're still grappling with with the lockdowns and saying this isn't real life. We haven't really been able, except if the people are medical staff or have actually had to deal with COVID as a patient, as a loved one who died from COVID. I mean, it's very confusing for all of us.
It is, and I think that unfortunately, without getting preachy, but I don't mind doing it, that's why we're in the problems we're in right now, because people refuse to believe that it was real. And no one they knew died, or, well, they got over it. You know, it's sort of, someone made the comparison the other day to chickenpox, that when you have chickenpox when you're younger, you have it when you're 8, right? But then when you're 50, you can get shingles because it never really went anywhere. It laid there. And we know about chickenpox and there is a vaccine and we know what that is, but that COVID is so new. Of course it's going to have lasting effects on you, and we don't know what they are. And we can't inoculate against them because we can't inoculate against it at all. So it's like there's a chickenpox vaccine and a shingles medicine. And that's two sides of the same thing. There's something you can do about it, but we don't know what to do about any of this at all. So pretending that none of that is true and acting shocked when this turns out to be true, what do you mean? It's like shingles.
That would be like me pretending I don't have MS and trying to walk around and being, sick on the sidewalk. No, I'm fine. And you pretending you haven't lost a spouse, and no, it's fine. We have to acknowledge, and as writers, we have to write about it. We have to share it with others, and hopefully they'll get some sort of when I read yours, I felt like, yes, people can, this is a horrible thing, and she loved this man deeply, and they have this wonderful bond that will last forever. But this was such a cruddy thing that she had to go through, but you came out, and you came out, and you had your son, and you're going to move on, you're going to move forward. And that's what, that message comes ringing through in your memoir, and is very needed, especially in a time like this.
I appreciate that. And I felt the same way about your book, that you were like, these things happened. And things like the dog, or things like, you know, you had to keep writing, you had to keep working, and your kids have feelings about it, that you didn't really have a choice. And I said to my therapist, you know, well, you know, I didn't really have a choice but to keep going. And she was like, but some people choose not to. And there is nothing, there's no shade in that. There's no shame in people deciding along parts of their trauma, whether or not they can do it this way or that way or at all. I felt like I had so much so many people relying on me, and I had this baby, and now I had to finish the adoption, not just for me, but for Scott. And I felt like that I took that responsibility on myself. I mean, I remember I had lunch with someone who said, well, a friend of mine who's older, he's a widower, is writing a thing. It's mostly about widowers and older men, but you should have breakfast with them. So I had the baby, and he was kind of annoyed with the baby, because baby was like not quite 2. And he doesn't understand what this is, what we're doing, but there's breakfast. So he's climbing on my lap. And the guy's kind of like, hey, I'm like, eh. And he said, so how do you feel about single motherhood? And I realized he was asking me, was I going to go through with it?
Wow.
Yeah, that's what he was asking. Like, well, you came into it in this situation, and now, you know, this is different. And I said, this is my child. This is my child. And he was like, oh, you know, but, you know, people deal with things and have different ideas about things. Once again, there's no shame in how you deal with stuff, but I didn't feel I had a choice, because I didn't. This was my child, and I was in love, and this is what I owed myself and my family and Scott and Brooks and everybody involved. And also I'm super stubborn. So I don't like being told I can't do stuff. That's the way to get me to do things, is to guide many trainers who would say, well, you can't finish that mile. Yes, I can. And I'm like, you know, and it's ugly and sweaty and terrible for everybody.
Oh, Leslie and Meredith, it is ostracist embodied voice. I just want to butt in real quick to relate to you some questions from folks. The first one is, many people imagine that writing a memoir about grief can be healing. Yes, no, it's complicated.
Yes.
I'll let you go, Leslie.
Yes, it was healing. Like I said, for the reasons I stated before, were just like, it's a thing I needed to literally get off my chest. And it was healing also in the reading of it. And as I was writing it, and I would go back and go, I'm not in that place anymore. I don't feel that terrible anymore. So I had evidence. I had written evidence and proof that I was, if not getting better, I was moving to different parts of that. And you could go right back to the other place really quickly. So there's no guarantee of that, but that there was some forward motion, and that was very helpful to me. What do you think?
Well, I did process, like, the grief in the book, in my book, is the loss of my mother, and then the loss of my health. Like, on the loss of my health, it took me a long time to accept it, and I fought it for a long time. I would fight my symptoms and say, this isn't really happening. And I thought that if I listened to my symptoms and made accommodations, it was like a failure. But writing about it made me realize, no, that's just being stubborn. That's just being not accepting the reality. And if I need to sleep extra, if I can't walk up those stairs because my legs won't allow me, I can't do that. And it's not because I'm a slug, it's because it's what I have to do. And that was helpful for me. Writing about my mom it's still touchy for me for a number of reasons, but it was nice to kind of take a 1,000-foot view and look at our relationship together and kind of put it into some sort of context. I think it helped me proceed on how I'm going to continue to process her loss.
Cool.
Did either of you find yourselves having sort of like backing out of dead ends in terms of your narrative, because as you were telling yourself these stories, were discovering things that hadn't been obvious to you before, and then perhaps having to go back and rethink, okay, this is really the situation that as I need to understand it.
Certainly, I'll say that. And there's some parts that didn't wind up in the finished book, but James Patterson, who's been really great to me, said completely, you know, bluntly, everybody doesn't care about everything that happened to you. And that was incredibly, first of all, because, you know, as a columnist, I'm always like, I am endlessly fascinating. And in this situation that's so close, it's hard to parse those things, but there were certainly moments, some of which which ended up in the finished book and some did not, that I would go back and go, do I need to write this? So there were some things I knew I had to write about, like the court process, which was really difficult because it was not only very emotional, but it was some of it was very technical. And I would go, do I really need this? Because it was hard, and hard is bad. And I had to do that. So I had to move on to another part and come back to it. I had to move on to, like, probably, the dating thing was hard too. Even thinking about dating, and I had written about another part of it, and my editors were like, you don't need this. I go, fine. So then I went back, because I am mean to myself, I went right back to the chapter about the adoption and was like, okay, just get through this. And it was so much better for having taken a break from it, I think. Mm-hmm. How about you?
Well, it's funny with the book that I wrote right before this, which was I shadowed a middle school jazz band for a year after they had an unexpected loss of one of their members. A 12-year-old boy passed away, and he was a friend of my son's. And so I was going to see how this charismatic band director got them through this grief. And when I wrote the rough draft, it was enormous. It was huge. I think I wrote almost every single rehearsal, because I went to every rehearsal, everything. And I included way too much. And I had friends who loved the music community say, oh, edit. This needs to be cut down. Whereas it was almost the opposite with my memoir, because I was a little more stingy, because I was still afraid to go deeper. And so I would look at a draft and say, I'm really not explaining my relationship to my mother. I'm going to have to go to some places that are kind of uncomfortable. Or I'm not explaining why my husband is reacting this way to me being sick. Maybe I really need to have a section that explains how our relationship works, like what role he plays and what role I play, so that you understand it later on. So I think I had to go back and enrich it was pretty bare bones kind of chronology, and I had to enrich it, and that's where I put like these out of sequence sections about my meeting my husband, or sections about me being a child with my mother, just so that it could make it more understandable for readers when they read the forward moving motion of the book.
Well, Leslie and Meredith, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.
And and thank you very much for your books. I'm going to turn it over now to Evan. Evan, are you there? There he is. Well,
I am.
There
Hi.
he is.
Hi. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Leslie and Meredith. This has been great. I loved your readings, and this conversation was wonderful. I feel like you guys could talk all day about your books and your experiences. So thank you for joining us, and for those of you who are watching at home, thank you for spending your time with us. And I encourage you to get the books. The books are Uncomfortably Numb by Meredith O'Brien and Black Widow by Leslie Gray Streeter. They're both available from booksmith.com, and I hope you join us. I hope you enjoy us next week. We've got Jessica Rotondi and Lauren Francis Sharma here for Lockdown Lit next week. Otherwise, take care and be well, everybody. Hopefully we can all meet in person in the nearest future.
Thank you.
Until then.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your support for Lockdown Lit. All the authors have been wonderful. So yeah, go if you're really looking for something to do, go to the Lockdown Lit book section in Booksmith and go to town.
Just keep buying, spend some money.
Yep.
For sure, and I'll drop that link again. We have a list of upcoming Lockdown Lit events, and also you can watch all of our previous events there as well. So I'll drop that in the comments. Thank you guys again for joining us, and see you soon. Take
Thank
care.
you.